Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for holding the hearing. Just to introduce myself, I'm a non-resident senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies that's based in Washington, D.C. I'm also a columnist with the Sunday Guardian newspaper in India, and I'm from Quebec, so I'll see your Scottish self-determination and raise you one. I'm currently in Yap, in the Federated States of Micronesia, which is a location that saw this exact same problem. The U.S. had the same problem with its with the trust territories, trust territory in the Pacific that you're seeing now, and they dealt with it in a very different way, which we can get to a little bit later on if you want. But how important is Diego for? And I would double down again on Ms. Burra's framing. This isn't a free and open Indo-Pacific question. This goes well beyond just the Indian Ocean or Western security. It's critical. Its islands have become, again, like they were during World War II, just absolutely essential for defensive power projection, all that sort of stuff. We saw it in the Falklands. Falklands couldn't have been successful without Ascension, or however you want to pronounce it, Ascension. And where else could the UK operate from the region? From a U.S. perspective, especially after the loss of Bagram, it is incredibly important. I think the next session will go into more details. It's one of the only places where the subs can be reloaded. The heavy bombers can operate from quite easily. There's pre-positioning ships there. And there is, just understand that the U.S. perspective now, if such a thing is possible, while there hasn't been any objection from the Trump administration, key people within the Trump administration, before they entered the Trump administration, went on the record being very concerned about it, including the agreement, including Mike Waltz, who said, and the quote is, should the UK cede control over Chagos to Mauritius, I have no doubt that China would take advantage of the resulting vacuum. Then Senator Rubio said the deal poses a serious threat to our national security interests in the Indian Ocean. Senator John Kennedy gave a long talk in the House, in the Senate, where it said the deal would make Xi Jinping as happy as a gopher in soft dirt. So while I'm not quite sure how the decision is being seen within the Oval Office, there are a lot of people who will be around for a long time in the U.S. policy community who are not fans of this deal, and it affects, unlike what we heard, I think, in the first panel. I think it definitely affects the UK, way the UK is being seen, and perhaps not in a positive way. On to the question, the very important question about China's role in Mauritius. So China currently has the way China operates is through political warfare, and that includes things that you see in Mauritius, like, for example, a large number of very effective elite massage parlors, which all have, video facilities in them. There's money laundering with tracking of who's laundering whose money. There's narcotics. The money laundering is a symptom of criminality, so there is quite a lot of criminality that runs through the Chinese organized crime. And it goes to be an ability to position to exert influence in ways that are difficult to necessarily see or counter, because you're dealing with a decision maker who gets a call saying, look at this nice video we have of you, and do you want your family to see it or not? And not that penetration is already there, but this deal has just made Mauritius one of China's major targets for more political warfare operations. They will put everything they have into trying to destabilize Mauritius, get in leadership who are going to be against the deal, to try to undermine it from within. And it could look like things you wouldn't expect. It's not necessarily just going to be government to government conflict. It could be demonstrations popping up, social media things. For all of the reasons that I just described, the leadership within the U.S. says this is important. It's just as important for China to get rid of the base, for it to have freedom of operations across the Indian Ocean. So the operations that are going on in Mauritius are heavily advanced, and they will now be increased. Thank you. So 2 points. One is I would reiterate that the warfare that's going on now is political warfare, and it is highly advanced. And if you're talking about a 100-year time frame here, and so it's helpful to look at where some of these Chinese operations are more advanced to see what you might be seeing in the region. And here in Yap, for example. Secretary Hegseth just announced a $2 billion investment, military investment to expand the runway and do all sorts of other things. And former President Panuelo of the Federated States of Micronesia put it on the record a couple of years ago that there was Chinese backing for independence movements here in Yap and also probably in Chuk to try to destabilize those sorts of agreements. And at the same time, just not that far away, the Chinese are rebuilding a civilian airport in a different part of the state of Yap. That's about 670 kilometers from Guam. So there is a very active island game going on, and the Indian Ocean has not been immune. Take a look at what happened in Sri Lanka, what happened in the Maldives, and India has been very active at trying to counter that political warfare attempts to emplace in ways that might look civilian, but definitely have minimum dual use capabilities, and I would argue triple use. So they have a so-called commercial frontage, which is the justification for going in, and then they have they put in a port, for example, for commercial, but the port just happens to have specs that are practical for PLA, Navy, vessels to come in. But then there's always this third component, this criminal component, which is heavily corrosive for the domestic population and destroys the societies from within in a form of entropic warfare that makes it easier for Chinese influence operations to be effective. We tend to think of states we talk about states as these kind of as countries, not as individuals, but the Chinese political warfare operations are targeted specifically at key individuals, and they're all the way up and down the decision-making chain. It could be somebody in local customs, or who's the one that can approve that container coming in without being inspected, and you don't know what's on the container. It's heavily advanced. You can see it in the Western Pacific. It's not to be dismissed, and the political warfare is there in order to ease the positioning for the eventual kinetic, if necessary. But it may not become necessary because the political warfare is so effective to begin with. To answer the question, the specific question, I just as a fun thought experiment, the question as it's written is, how might shifting regional alliances and economic pressures influence Mauritius's long-term commitment to safeguards? Let's replace the word Mauritius with the UK. If I was China, I would be funding demonstrations and operations within the UK to say this is a continuing colonial experiment. We have no money. Why are we giving money to Mauritius? Why isn't there another solution for this? Because the agreement stops if the UK stops paying. So that is, from my perspective, that would be the leverage point. Get the UK to a position where it stops paying and feels morally correct about not paying. And then the treaty falls apart. So there might be a bunch of different ways of killing this treaty, but the UK may be one of the weak points in the chain, especially over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. That's why when the US set up its compacts of free association, it had the same problem with the old Japanese mandate territories. Yap was controlled by the Spanish, and then the Germans, and then the Japanese, and then it became a UN trust territory. And what the U.S. did was it convened a Congress of Micronesia. People from across the region came together to determine their own future. Part of it, Commonwealth of Northern Marianas decided to join the U.S. Other three went independent. This is the separating off that I'm being told is not possible, but it happened during the treaty territory time. Palau became independent, FSM became independent, Marshall Islands became independent, and then they signed compacts of free association with the U.S. And that's something that I don't quite understand why that wasn't done with the Chagosians, given them a referendum. Let them choose. Do they want to go independent? Do they want to compact with the UK? Do they want to compact with the US? Do they want to join India? I mean, as was brought up, they are physically much closer to India than they are to Mauritius. So the lack of imagination in solving this problem, especially given the precedents that you can see in the Western Pacific and the Central Pacific, which are similarly strategically crucial, is a little bit perplexing to me.
Thank you. Baroness Blackstone. My question is for Cleo Paskal. I think you've already said quite a lot about how China has reacted to the UK government's recognition of Mauritian sovereignty and continued presence in military presence in Diego Garcia. Could you just say a little bit more, quite briefly perhaps, on what this signals for India?
India is very important. I think, to be blunt, I think that the Indian position is, as long as there's no British colonialism, that's all they really care about. I mean, just sort of as a starting point. But they're very aware, especially the strategic community, of the Chinese penetration of Mauritius, and the strategic community is certainly not averse to having the base there. I think that there would be a desire to expand it potentially to a Quad plus UK base. I mean, this is what the discussions are very stuck in correcting some pretty horrible things that happened before, the moving of the Chagosians, for example, without thinking about, okay, how can we reimagine this future where what we see happening over the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years can be mitigated for the benefit of security, Indo-Pacific freedom across the region, but also for the Chagosians. The agreement, for example, specifies that Mauritians have should be employed if possible on the base. It doesn't specify Chagosians should be employed potentially on the base. Like the agreement is essentially one colonial power handing it over to the other, and the Indians are very aware of that. So if you'd had if a referendum would have been possible, could be possible, where other options are included, including India in the decision making, it might actually have a longer term strategic benefit for pulling India into a stronger Quad association, which would bulk up the free and open Indo-Pacific profile of the base, and also give more options for Chagosians.
Yes, I noticed from your presentation that you made a lot of very good points about the way the Chinese operate and the risks from them. But would not those risks and that method of operating be made even more likely to be effective if this agreement were not entered into?
Something needs to be done. Definitely something needs to be done. But there are other options that I think give more legitimacy. One of the things that the Chinese Communist Party hates is democracy. And what this agreement is a government-to-government agreement that didn't involve the decision-making, the self-determination of the people involved, the sovereignty of the individual. There's been a lot of talk about land, but not a lot of talk about people. And if the people are involved in the decision-making, that actually makes it very difficult for the Chinese. It hurts their narrative warfare on this decision, on this discussion. So, I mean, apart from being morally the correct thing to do, and I would argue legally the correct thing to do, as we saw with the winding down of the trust territory in the Pacific, it has resulted in a sustained, healthier relationship with the people of the Pacific Islands, who fundamentally don't want to be part of a Chinese vassal state either. I mean, I think the Chagosians wouldn't want to give over a newly won self-determination to the Chinese Communist Party. They would want to be part of a free and open Indo-Pacific. So it's not like I don't see the choices as this deal or just the way it was before. I think that there's an opportunity for creating an agreement of the sort that we have seen successfully implemented for several decades now in the Pacific, that satisfies several different criteria, including the argument that democracy, transparency, accountability, and rule of law is a better system than what the Chinese Communist Party has on offer. Yeah, well, can start by rebuilding the British Navy. That would probably be helpful. I mean, it's a straight up capacity issue, right? What you don't need is more workshops. You can have as much maritime domain awareness as you want, but if you don't have maritime domain enforcement, then it doesn't really mean anything. It's something that we've seen in the Pacific Islands. What you're also probably going to see if Chinese influence increases in Mauritius is low-level blockage of the ability to collaborate. So we saw this with a U.S. Coast Guard vessel that tried to come into the Solomons. It was on an illegal fishing patrol, and it was supposed to come in to refuel, and it couldn't get permission to land. They just got timed out and eventually had to move on to Fiji. And then the same thing happened in Vanuatu. And it's not a denial. It's nothing that reaches the threshold where you can go, oh, well, this was, they're doing it because of Chinese influence, but it just doesn't happen. So again, you're not operating in an environment where necessarily all parties want these things to happen. And you'll have somebody behind them, and it could be somebody very low level in the bureaucracy, but who's been identified by China, or in this case, even Russia or Iran. None of those guys want this base to be in operation. Just have their person not pick up the phone when you need them to pick up the phone, and then something doesn't happen. So unless you have an effective counter-political warfare operation at the same time as you have the capacity to deliver an alternative, it becomes very difficult. Thank you for the question. It is great. There's lots that can be done. And the advantage that the free world has is that it has truth on its side. And the local populations don't like their corrupt officials. They want, for the most part, democracy, transparency, accountability, rule of law, and in many cases, they are fighting hard to try to get the truth out about what the problems are domestically. And that's where things like investigative reporting, money laundering investigations, all that sort of stuff can happen, because in a lot of cases, people will take the Chinese money or the Russian money or the Iranian, whatever money it is, but they don't want to spend it domestically. They want to spend it in London or in New York or in Miami. So there's a lot that can be done by the free world to help clean up these systems. And there was somebody was telling me that they were talking to a Chinese operator in Africa, and they said, we're going to win because we have an unlimited bribery budget. And the answer to that is, well, we don't have an unlimited bribery budget, but we have 100 very good prosecutors and investigators who will make it very difficult for people to continue to take your money and to continue to provide for their families in other ways. So we have truth on our side, and we have all the tools available if we want to start to use them to go after what is known as strategic corruption. It's a whole field, the strategic corruption field. So yes, you're right. I gave you the scare stories, but there are options for dealing with it, and it can be incredibly effective. It can turn the tide very quickly. You just have to change that cost-benefit analysis of the individual in taking that Chinese money. It's more difficult when there's the videotapes and that sort of stuff involved. But if they're doing that kind of thing, there's probably a money trail to other things as well that can be done.